The massive crystal towers of Zalara Prime cracked and crumbled as another wave of enemy fire rained down from the dark sky. In the underground council chamber, Elder Voss watched his world die through the shimmering view screen. His forearms shook as he reached for the emergency communication device that might be their last hope. Around the curved table, 12 other council members sat in stunned silence. Their blue, translucent skin normally glowed with soft light when they were calm, but now it flickered wildly with fear and panic. Outside, the screams of their people echoed through the tunnels as they fled deeper underground. "The western colonies are gone," reported Councilmember Nira, her voice barely a whisper. "All 2 million inhabitants." The Korthok ships turned the entire surface to glass. Her skin flashed bright red with grief. They didn't even try to take prisoners or steal resources. They just killed everyone. Elder Voss closed his ancient eyes. In his 800 years of life, he had never imagined such cruelty was possible. The Korthok Empire had appeared in their space 6 months ago, and since then, they had methodically destroyed 17 Zalani worlds. Not for territory, not for resources, but simply because they enjoyed the act of destruction. "What about the defense grid?" asked another council member. "Surely our shields can hold them off long enough for help to arrive." A younger Zalani officer stepped forward, his skin flashing with embarrassment. "The shields are failing, Elder. Their weapons cut through our energy barriers like they weren't even there. We estimate 12 hours before total collapse." The chamber fell completely silent except for the distant rumble of explosions above. Every Zalani knew what that meant. In 12 hours, their ancient civilization would join the others as nothing more than space dust and terrible memories. Elder Voss picked up a small device from the table. It was crude by Zalani standards, barely more advanced than their children's toys, but it represented their final chance. For weeks, their scientists had been tracking mysterious energy signatures from a small yellow star system on the edge of the galaxy. The beings there called themselves humans, and they had only recently figured out how to travel between stars. "Are we really going to trust our lives to those primitive creatures?" Nira asked, staring at the device. "Our intelligence reports say they still fight wars with metal projectiles and chemical explosives. They haven't even developed proper energy weapons." Elder Voss turned the device over in his hands. "Primitive, yes. But our deep space monitors have detected something interesting about them. When the Drakmor pirates attacked their outer colonies last year, the humans didn't just defend themselves. They tracked down every single pirate ship and destroyed them completely. Not one escaped." "That could just be luck," another council member argued. "Perhaps," Voss replied. "But luck doesn't explain how they found pirate bases that had been hidden for decades. Luck doesn't explain how they seemed to know exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. These humans may be primitive, but they understand war in a way that we never have." The building shook again as more Korthok bombs fell on the city above, through the view screen. They could see the beautiful crystal gardens that had taken centuries to grow burning in massive fires. Zalani families ran through the streets, carrying whatever possessions they could manage, searching for shelter that didn't exist. "We are a peaceful people," Voss continued, his voice growing stronger. "We've never built weapons designed to kill. Our entire defense strategy relies on hiding behind energy shields and hoping threats go away. But the Korthak don't go away. They won't stop until every last one of us is dead." He activated the device with one of his 4 hands while typing coordinates with another. "The humans have something we lack. They understand that sometimes survival requires violence. They've been fighting and killing each other for thousands of years, and now they're finally turning that skill outward to the stars." The emergency beacon powered up, its crude human-built transmitter crackling with static. Voss began recording their desperate message, speaking slowly so the translation systems could convert Zilani words into the simple human language called English. This is Elder Voss of the Zilani Republic. We are a peaceful species, facing complete extinction. The Korthok Empire has destroyed 17 of our colonies and will finish us within hours. We request immediate assistance from any humans who receive this message. In exchange, we offer all of our technological knowledge and scientific discoveries. We have advanced medical techniques, energy manipulation technology, and faster-than-light communication systems. Please help us. He paused, looking around at his fellow council members. Some were crying, their skin flashing with colors of grief and desperation. Others sat perfectly still, already resigned to their fate. We know you are far away, Voss continued into the transmitter. We know we are asking you to risk your lives for strangers you've never met. But if there is any mercy in your species, any compassion for those who cannot defend themselves, please come. We are dying. The message shot out into space at faster-than-light speed, racing across thousands of light years toward that small yellow star system. Now all they could do was wait and hope that somewhere out there, someone was listening. 3 days passed in the underground shelters. The Korthok had landed ground troops and were hunting down survivors with methodical efficiency. Half of Zalera Prime's population was already dead. Elder Voss sat in the communications room, staring at the silent receiver, when suddenly it crackled to life. Lieutenant Amy Brooks was working the night shift aboard the human colony ship New Frontier when the alien transmission came through. She almost ignored it at first, thinking it was just more space static, but something about the signal pattern caught her attention. After running it through the translation computers, she stared at the message in shock. Captain Morrison to the bridge immediately, she announced over the ship's communication system. Priority 1 emergency. Captain Jake Morrison arrived within minutes, still pulling on his uniform jacket. What's the situation, Amy? She handed him the decoded message, watching his face change as he read. It came in 20 minutes ago, sir. I've confirmed the source, coordinates. There's definitely a major space battle happening in that system. Jake read the message twice, then looked up at his communications officer. How long to reach them? Amy had already run the calculations. 2 weeks at maximum engine output, sir. But Captain, we're just a colony ship. We don't have any weapons beyond basic defensive systems. Jake walked to the navigation console and stared at the star charts. The Zilani system was far outside, normal human space, in a region where no human had ever traveled. Going there would mean risking his entire crew on a rescue mission for aliens they'd never met. Send a message to Earth Command, he said finally. Full priority transmission. Tell them we have contact with an alien species, requesting military assistance against hostile forces. Request immediate deployment of all available warships to our location. Sir, that could take months, Amy replied. The message alone will take 3 weeks to reach Earth, and then they'll need time to organize a fleet. Jake turned back to face her, his expression grim but determined. Then we better not wait for them. Set course for the Zilani system. Maximum speed. Sir, with respect, we can't fight an entire enemy fleet with a colony ship. Jake smiled for the first time since receiving the message. Who said anything about fighting fair? Send word to every human ship within range. Military, civilian, cargo, haulers, passenger liners, mining vessels. Everyone. Tell them what's happening and give them coordinates. Amy stared at him in amazement. You want to bring civilians into a war zone? Amy, those aliens offered us their entire technological database. That's worth more than money can measure. But more importantly, they're dying, and they asked us for help. That's what humans do. We help. The space around Zalera Prime had been quiet for 2 days. The Korthok fleet had pulled back to their staging area, leaving behind only destruction and the floating wreckage of Zilani defense ships. Elder Voss sat in the emergency command center, buried deep beneath the planet's surface, staring at empty scanner screens and trying not to think about the silence from their outer colonies. "Any word from the humans?" asked Council Member Nira, her blue skin flickering with desperate hope. Voss shook his head. "Nothing since we sent the message. Perhaps they decided the risk was too great. Perhaps they never received it at all." Suddenly, the long-range sensors began beeping frantically. The Zilani officer monitoring the displays jumped up from his station, his skin flashing bright yellow with excitement. "Elder, ships approaching from hyperspace. Multiple contacts." Voss rushed to the sensor station, his four hearts pounding. On the screen, he could see the telltale energy signatures of vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel. But something was wrong with the readings. The computer kept updating the count. 5 ships, then 10, then 15. "How many?" Voss whispered. The officer's skin cycled through colors of amazement and disbelief. 37 ships, Elder, and they're in perfect military formation. Above the planet's surface, the human fleet materialized in a display that left a few surviving Zilani defense ships speechless. The vessels weren't the crude, bulky constructions they had expected from such a young species. Instead, sleek warships hung in space like deadly predators, their hulls bristling with weapon systems and sensor arrays. The lead ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest Zilani vessel. Along its side, painted in bold white letters, was the name Retribution. Smaller destroyers and cruisers formed a protective screen around it, while squadrons of fighter craft launched from carrier bays and began patrol patterns. But what truly shocked the Zilani was the diversity of the fleet. Some ships clearly belonged to the human military, with standardized designs and matching paint schemes. Others were obviously civilian vessels that had been hastily converted for war. Cargo ships now mounted missile launchers where their loading bays used to be. Passenger liners had been transformed into troop transports. Even mining ships had joined the fleet, their industrial cutting lasers now aimed outward toward potential enemies. "Captain," Jake Morrison's voice crackled across all communication channels, speaking in the carefully pronounced English that the Zilani translation computers could process. "This is the Human Expeditionary Force calling Zilani Command. We received your distress call. Please identify the location of hostile forces." Elder Voss nearly collapsed with relief. His trembling hands activated the communication system. "Captain Morrison, this is Elder Voss of the Zilani Republic. We cannot express our gratitude for your response. The Korthok fleet withdrew to the outer system 2 days ago. Our intelligence suggests they will return in approximately 48 hours to complete their bombardment of our homeworld." There was a brief pause before a different voice came through the speakers. This one was deeper, rougher, carrying the tone of someone who had seen many battles. "This is Admiral Thomas Reed, aboard the Retribution. Elder Voss, we're not here to provide humanitarian aid. We're here to solve your problem permanently." The words sent a chill through the Zilani command center. They had expected the humans to offer food, medical supplies, maybe transport ships to evacuate survivors. They had not expected what sounded like a declaration of war. Amy Brooks, now serving as the fleet's intelligence coordinator, began transmitting data requests to the Zilani computers. "Elder Voss, we need complete tactical information on the Korthok forces. Ship types, weapon capabilities, attack patterns, everything you have." Voss hesitated. The Zilani had always been a peaceful people. Even their defense fleets were designed primarily to protect civilians during evacuations, not to fight wars. The idea of sharing military intelligence for offensive operations went against everything their culture represented. "Captain Morrison," he said carefully, "we appreciate your willingness to help. But we must ask about your intentions. Are you planning to engage the Korthok fleet in direct combat?" Admiral Reed's laugh came through the speakers, cold and humorless. "Elder, your people called for help because you're facing extinction. We didn't travel halfway across the galaxy to have a conversation. We came here to remove the threat." Amy's voice joined the discussion, more diplomatic, but equally determined. "We've been studying the data you included with your distress call. The Korthok have destroyed 43 different species over the past 3 centuries. They don't negotiate, they don't take prisoners, and they don't stop until their targets are completely eliminated. Is that correct?" "Yes," Voss replied sadly. "They seem to view genocide as entertainment. We've tried to understand their motivations, but they simply enjoy causing death and suffering." Captain Morrison's voice hardened noticeably. "Then they picked the wrong species to threaten. Amy, transmit the tactical analysis to all ship commanders. I want every captain to understand exactly what we're dealing with." The Zilani watched. Their communication arrays light up as massive amounts of data flowed between the human ships. Within minutes, the entire fleet had access to 300 years of Korthak military records, attack patterns, and strategic doctrines. But more than that, they now knew the full scope of the enemy's crimes against peaceful civilizations. "Admiral Reed," Elder Voss said, his voice growing stronger, "we must warn you that the Korthok fleet numbers over 200 ships. They have weapons that can penetrate our strongest defensive shields as if they were made of paper. Many of their vessels are the size of our largest space stations." Reed's response was immediate and confident. "Elder, humans have been fighting wars for over 10,000 years. We've learned a few things about dealing with bullies. Size doesn't matter if you can't hit your target. Numbers don't matter if your enemy knows where you're going to be before you get there." Amy added her own analysis. "We've identified critical weaknesses in their tactical approach. They rely on overwhelming firepower and psychological intimidation. They expect their enemies to either surrender immediately or fight defensively. They've never encountered an opponent willing to take the fight directly to them." Captain Morrison addressed the Zilani directly. "Elder Voss, we need you to understand something about humans. When we see innocent people being murdered, we don't just get angry, we get focused. The Korthok have been terrorizing this part of the galaxy for centuries because nobody has ever made them pay a real price for their actions. That's about to change." Through the view screen, Elder Voss could see the human fleet reorganizing into what looked like attack formations. Fighter squadrons were launching from carriers, destroyers were charging their weapon systems, and the massive battleships were moving into position like chess pieces being arranged by a master player. For the first time in months, Elder Voss felt something other than despair. These humans hadn't come just to rescue the Zilani. They had come to deliver justice to the monsters who had been killing innocents across the galaxy, and from the cold determination in their voices, Voss suspected the Korthok were about to learn what happened when you threatened someone under human protection. General Vec had conquered 43 different species in his 300-year military career. He had watched entire civilizations crumble before the might of the Korthak war machine. And he had never seen an enemy that didn't follow the same predictable pattern. First came desperate defense attempts, then frantic evacuation efforts, and finally complete surrender when they realized resistance was hopeless. As his fleet of 212 warships dropped out of hyperspace near Zalera Prime, Vec expected to find scattered Zilani ships fleeing in terror, or perhaps a few defense platforms making one last pathetic stand. Instead, his tactical display showed something that made him lean forward in his command chair with genuine confusion. Human ships floated in space like sleeping giants waiting to wake up, but they weren't arranged in any defensive formation he had ever seen. Instead of clustering together behind protective shields or positioning themselves near the planet they were supposed to defend, the human vessels were spread across thousands of kilometers of empty space. Each ship sat alone, apparently isolated and vulnerable. "Status report," Beck demanded from his tactical officer. "Sir, we count 37 human vessels. mixed classes including battleships, destroyers, and smaller craft. But their formation makes no strategic sense. They're positioned as if they want us to attack them individually. Vec's reptilian face twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. In all his centuries of warfare, he had never encountered such obvious tactical incompetence. These primitive mammals had apparently learned nothing from studying the battles that had led to their desperate cry for help. Foolish creatures, he growled to his bridge crew. They spread themselves thin, thinking they can cover more space. Instead, they've made themselves easy targets. Attack Formation 7. We'll destroy them one by one, and watch the others flee in terror. The 1st Korthok Squadron, consisting of 12 heavy cruisers and their escort fighters, moved toward the nearest human ship. It was a destroyer-class vessel with the name Vengeance painted along its hull in bold red letters. The ship hung motionless in space, apparently unaware of the approaching threat. Captain Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the Vengeance, watching the Korthok ship's approach on her tactical display. Her crew was perfectly silent, each person focused on their assigned task. They had trained for this moment during the 2-week journey to Zelani's space, running simulation after simulation until every move became instinct. Distance to targets, she asked quietly. 60,000 kilometers, and closing, replied her tactical officer. They're maintaining Formation 7, just as intelligence predicted. Grant smiled. The Korthok had used the same attack pattern for over a century. They approached in tight formation, concentrated their fire on a single target until it was destroyed, then moved to the next victim. It was brutally effective against species that fought defensively, but humans had never been known for playing defense. All ships. This is Admiral Thomas Reed, came the voice over the fleet communication channel. Enemy has committed to their attack run. Execute Crazy Horse Protocol, on my mark. Grant's smile widened. The Crazy Horse Protocol was named after a Native American warrior who had defeated a much larger army by refusing to fight the way his enemies expected. Instead of meeting force with force, he had used speed, unpredictability, and intimate knowledge of the battlefield to turn superior numbers into a disadvantage. Mark. Admiral Reed's voice echoed across space. Suddenly, the human fleet exploded into motion. Every ship began moving at maximum acceleration, but not toward the enemy or away from them. Instead, they scattered in what looked like complete chaos, each vessel following its own seemingly random path through space. The Korthok Squadron, targeting the Vengeance, found themselves shooting at empty space as Grant's ship rolled and twisted through a complex evasion pattern. But this wasn't just running away. As the human destroyer danced between enemy weapons fire, it launched missiles in carefully calculated volleys that seemed to come from impossible angles. "What are they doing?" demanded General Vec, watching his tactical display in growing confusion. The human ships were moving like nothing he had ever encountered before. They twisted and spun through space, as if the laws of physics didn't apply to them, firing weapons in directions that defied military logic. Then he began to understand. The apparently chaotic movements weren't random at all. Each human ship was following a precise pattern designed to put them exactly where they needed to be at exactly the right moment. They were fighting like a pack of wolves, each individual seemingly acting alone, but actually working in perfect coordination with the others. Lieutenant Commander Brian Mitchell flew his fighter squadron directly through the center of the Korthok formation, his small craft weaving between the massive enemy ships like insects, avoiding swatting hands. His squadron of 12 fighters was outnumbered 50-1 by enemy craft, but they had advantages the Korthok had never encountered before. Wildcat leader to all fighters, Mitchell transmitted to his pilots. "Remember, these guys have been bullying defenseless civilians for 3 centuries. Time to show them what happens when they pick on someone who fights back." His fighters split into 4 groups of 3, each team targeting a different section of the enemy fleet. The pilots tried to pursue them, But human fighters were smaller, faster, and more maneuverable than anything they had faced before. More importantly, human pilots had grown up playing three-dimensional video games and flying in environments where a single mistake meant death. Mitchell dove his fighter directly toward the Korthok flagship, a massive dreadnought that bristled with defensive weapons. His targeting computer locked onto what intelligence had identified as the ship's primary shield generator. As enemy fire erupted around him, he transmitted on an open channel that every ship in both fleets could hear. "This is for every innocent family you murdered," he said, his voice cold with fury. "This is for every world you turned to ash, and this is to make sure you never hurt anyone again." His torpedo struck the shield generator in a brilliant explosion that lit up space for hundreds of kilometers. Suddenly, the supposedly invincible Korthok flagship was vulnerable, its protective barriers flickering and failing all around the battlefield. Similar scenes played out as human ships struck with precision and fury. The Korthok found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to know their weaknesses better than they knew them themselves. Human missiles penetrated their armor at exactly the right spots. Human fighters attacked their ships' blind spots, and human tactics exploited every flaw in their centuries-old battle doctrines. Within the first hour of combat, 67 Korthok ships had been reduced to floating debris. Their formations were shattered, their commanders were dead, and their surviving crews were beginning to panic in a way that none of them had ever experienced before. General Vec watched his fleet disintegrate around him and felt something he had not experienced in 3 centuries of warfare: fear. These humans weren't just fighting to defend the Zalani, they were fighting with the focused intensity of a species that had decided to eliminate a threat completely and permanently. "All ships retreat," he ordered, his voice cracking with desperation. "Fall back to the home system immediately." The surviving Korthok vessels turned and fled, their engines straining to reach hyperspace before the human hunters could finish them off. They had come to destroy another helpless species, and instead had encountered something that would haunt their nightmares for the rest of their lives. Admiral Reed watched the enemy flee and turned to Captain Morrison. "Enemy forces are withdrawing to their staging area in the Korthok home system," Morrison reported. Reed's response sent a chill through every human officer who heard it, and it marked the moment when the galaxy's most feared empire realized they had finally met their match. "Then, that's where we're going next," Reed said quietly. "It's time to finish this." The Korthok High Command bunker was buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface of their homeworld, protected by shields that could withstand direct hits from planet-killer weapons. For 3 centuries, it had served as the nerve center of an empire built on fear and death. The reptilian beings who ruled from this fortress had never imagined that anyone would dare attack their home system, much less succeed in breaching their defenses. Supreme Commander Vex stood before the massive tactical display that showed the complete destruction of his outer defense perimeter. Red symbols representing destroyed stations and dead ships filled the screen, while blue dots marking human vessels moved deeper into Korthok space with unstoppable determination. "How is this possible?" Vex hissed, his scaled skin rippling with disbelief. "Our defense grid was supposed to be impenetrable. We had over 800 ships protecting the home system." His tactical advisor, General Cray, trembled as he delivered the report. "Supreme Commander, the humans don't fight like any species we've encountered. They don't mass their ships for frontal assaults or try to overwhelm our defenses with superior numbers. Instead, they strike at precisely the right points to cause maximum damage with minimum risk. Through the underground facility's communication systems, they could hear the panicked reports flooding in from across their empire. Human strike forces had appeared simultaneously in 12 different systems, hitting Korthok military bases with surgical precision. But these weren't random attacks. Every target had been carefully chosen to cripple the Empire's ability to wage war. Major Rebecca Turner crouched behind the twisted metal wreckage of what used to be Korthok Station Alpha's main corridor. The space station had been one of the Empire's primary military communication hubs, and taking it had required 6 hours of brutal corridor fighting. Her Marines had fought through automated defense systems and desperate enemy soldiers to reach the station's central computer core. "Turner to Fleet Command," she reported through her helmet communicator, speaking in the calm, professional tone that all human military personnel used even in the middle of combat. "Station Alpha is secured. Resistance has been neutralized. We've accessed their primary data storage systems." Admiral Thomas Reed's voice came through clearly, despite being transmitted across thousands of light-years of space. "What did you find, Major?" Turner looked at the holographic displays floating above the alien computer terminals, her face hardening as she read the translated text. "Sir, we've uncovered complete records of their military campaigns spanning the last 500 years. Detailed documentation of every species they've encountered, including attack plans, casualty reports, and—" She paused, struggling to keep her voice steady. Trophy recordings of the final moments of entire civilizations. The silence on the communication channel stretched for several seconds before Admiral Reed responded. "How many species, Major?" 43. "Confirmed complete extinctions, sir. Another dozen species reduced to scattered survivors hiding in remote systems. The records show they kept detailed statistics on kill counts, measuring their success by how quickly they could eliminate entire populations." Turner scrolled through more files, each one revealing new horrors. The Korthok didn't just kill their enemies. They studied different methods of causing maximum psychological trauma before death. They experimented with weapons designed to cause prolonged suffering. They recorded the final transmissions of dying civilizations and played them as entertainment during their victory celebrations. "Admiral," Turner continued, her voice now carrying a cold edge that her men had learned to recognize. "They have video records of children being hunted for sport, families being separated and tortured in front of each other. They turned genocide into a form of art." The response from Admiral Reed was immediate and final. "Download everything, Major. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence. The galaxy needs to see exactly what we're dealing with." Meanwhile, Colonel Paul Martinez commanded the siege of the Korthok homeworld from the bridge of the assault carrier Justice. His ships had surrounded the planet, cutting off all escape routes while landing forces established beachheads on the surface. The plan was methodical and thorough: capture every government facility, every military base, and every communication center. But something unexpected had happened during the assault. As human forces closed in on government buildings across the planet, white flags began appearing. Korthok officials who had spent centuries ordering the deaths of billions were suddenly trying to surrender. Admiral Reed, Colonel Martinez reported, "We're receiving surrender offers from multiple Korthok facilities, government bunkers, military compounds. Even their Supreme Command wants to negotiate terms." Reed's response carried no emotion whatsoever. "There will be no negotiations, Colonel. Continue the operation as planned." Martinez understood the order, but his years of military training compelled him to ask the obvious question. "Sir, if they're willing to surrender, couldn't we achieve our objectives without additional bloodshed?" The answer came not from Admiral Reed, but from Captain Jake Morrison, whose voice carried the weight of everything they had discovered about their enemy. "Colonel, 43 species tried to surrender to the Korthok over the past 3 centuries. Every single one was completely exterminated, regardless. They had children beg for their lives, while Korthok soldiers laughed and filmed their executions. They don't get to surrender now." Across the galaxy, other civilizations had been monitoring the human assault with growing alarm. The Galactic Trade Federation, a loose alliance of merchant species that had managed to avoid Korthok attention by staying neutral, sent frantic diplomatic messages to the human fleet ambassador Patricia Foster, representing humanity at the Federation's emergency session stood before representatives of 40 different species. Many of them were clearly terrified by what they had witnessed. In less than a week, humans had accomplished what the combined militaries of the galaxy had been unable to do in centuries. They had brought the Korthok Empire to its knees. Ambassador Foster, spoke the Federation chairman, a tall, insect-like being whose translator made his clicks sound like formal diplomatic language. We understand your anger at Korthok aggression, but the scale of your retaliation concerns us greatly. Surely there must be room for negotiation and peaceful resolution. Foster looked around the assembly chamber at representatives of species that had cowered in fear while the Korthok murdered entire civilizations. Some of these same aliens had refused to help the Zilani when they sent out their desperate plea for assistance. Chairman, she replied, her voice carrying the same cold determination that had become the trademark of human diplomacy. Let me be absolutely clear about humanity's position. The Korthok Empire chose to build their civilization on genocide. They chose to make extinction their primary export. They chose to turn the murder of innocents into entertainment. She activated a holographic projector that filled the chamber with images recovered from Korthok data cores. The assembled aliens watched in horror as the screen showed the final moments of species that had once thrived among the stars, now reduced to historical footnotes in Korthok trophy collections. Every single one of these civilizations tried diplomacy. First, Foster continued. They offered tribute, technology, territory, anything to avoid war. The Korthok response was always the same: total extermination. So no, there will be no negotiations. There will be no peaceful resolution. The Korthok chose genocide, and humanity has chosen justice. The chamber fell completely silent as the weight of her words sank in. For the first time in galactic history, a species had emerged that was not only powerful enough to challenge the galaxy's greatest predator, but ruthless enough to see the job through to its inevitable conclusion. The age of Korthok terror was ending, but the galaxy was beginning to realize that the cure might be more terrifying than the disease itself. The rebuilt council chamber on Zalara Prime gleamed with new crystal formations, but the scars of war were still visible through the transparent walls. 6 months had passed since the Korthok Empire's final surrender, and the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. The most feared military force in known space had been completely destroyed by a species that most civilizations had never even heard of before the war began. Elder Voss stood at the center of the chamber, his forearms gesturing toward the human officers seated around the curved table. His blue skin flickered with emotions that the translation computers couldn't properly interpret, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and something that might have been fear. When we sent that desperate message into space, Voss began, his voice carrying across the room, we expected help, perhaps ships to evacuate our people, or medical supplies for the wounded, or maybe weapons to defend ourselves. We never imagined that anyone would travel across the galaxy to completely destroy our enemies. Captain Jake Morrison sat quietly, watching the elderly Zilani struggle with his words. The past 6 months had changed Morrison in ways he was still trying to understand. He had left Earth as the commander of a simple colony ship, but he had returned as one of the architects of the galaxy's most decisive military victory. We called for rescue, Voss continued, and you delivered something far more absolute. You delivered vengeance on a scale that we never thought possible. The Korthok Empire had terrorized this part of the galaxy for over 3 centuries. They had destroyed 43 entire species, turned billions of worlds into lifeless rocks, and seemed completely unstoppable. But you stopped them. You didn't just defeat them, you erased them from existence. The chamber fell silent as Voss paused, clearly struggling with what he wanted to say next. Finally, he looked directly at Admiral Thomas Reed, who sat at the head of the table with the calm expression of a man who had just finished a particularly difficult but necessary job. "We are grateful beyond words," Voss said quietly. "Our children will grow up in a galaxy where the Korthok can never hurt them. Our colonies are being rebuilt, our people are returning home, and for the first time in decades, we can plan for a future without fear. But if we are being completely honest, Admiral Reed, we must admit that we are now afraid of you." Admiral Reed leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. "Good," he said simply. "You should be." The blunt response sent a ripple of nervous energy through the Zalani representatives. Captain Morrison shifted uncomfortably and cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Admiral, that's not exactly the message we want to send to our new allies." Reed turned to face Morrison, his expression unchanged. "Captain, these people asked us to save them from monsters, and we did. But in the process, they got to see exactly what humans are capable of when we decide that something needs to be eliminated. That's not a bad thing for them to understand." Morrison started to object, but Reed raised his hand and continued speaking, this time addressing the entire Zalani Council. "Let me be absolutely clear about something. Humans don't want to rule you. We don't want to conquer your worlds, steal your resources, or control your government. We're not interested in building an empire or forcing other species to serve us." He stood up and walked to the chamber's main window, looking out at the construction crews rebuilding the city. "But we will never, and I mean never, stand by and watch genocide happen again. Not anywhere, not to anywhere, not for any reason. The galaxy has two choices going forward. Police yourselves and deal with threats like the Korthak before they get out of control, or let us handle the problem for you." Elder Voss exchanged glances with his fellow council members. "Admiral, what exactly does that mean for civilizations like ours? Are you saying that humanity now considers itself the galaxy's military force?" Captain Morrison answered before Reed could respond. "What we're saying is that we've learned something important over the past 6 months. The Korthok Empire existed for 3 centuries because nobody was willing to pay the price necessary to stop them. Dozens of species knew what they were doing, but everyone hoped someone else would deal with the problem. Amy Brooks, now promoted to commander and serving as the fleet's diplomatic liaison, added her own perspective. We've analyzed the historical records we captured from Korthok databases. There were at least 15 different occasions when allied species could have stopped the Korthok if they had worked together, but they chose to negotiate, to compromise, to hope that appeasing the aggressors would make them go away. And how did that work out?" Admiral Reed asked, his voice carrying a sharp edge. 43 species extinct. Trillions of innocent beings dead. Entire civilizations erased from history, because nobody wanted to make the hard choices when those choices might have actually mattered. The chamber fell silent again, as the weight of Reed's words settled over the assembly, through the hyperspace communication system. Ambassador Patricia Foster's voice joined the conversation from the Galactic Federation headquarters halfway across the galaxy. "This is Ambassador Foster, speaking to all species, monitoring this transmission," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber speakers. "The Human Federation wants to be absolutely clear about our position going forward. We offer friendship, trade, cultural exchange, and mutual cooperation to all peaceful species. We want to learn from you, share with you, and build a better galaxy together." She paused for a moment before continuing, and when she spoke again, her tone carried the same cold determination that had become humanity's signature in diplomatic circles. "But to any species considering the path of conquest and extinction, remember the Korthok. Remember that they were once considered the most powerful military force in known space. Remember that they controlled over 2,000 star systems and commanded fleets that numbered in the tens of thousands. And remember that when they chose to threaten innocence, humanity chose to remove them from existence." Elder Voss looked around the rebuilt council chamber, thinking about the children playing in the crystal gardens above. The families reunited after months of hiding, the future that his people now had because a species of strangers had been willing to travel across the galaxy to help them. "Captain Morrison," he said finally, "there is one more question we must ask. Now that the threat has been eliminated and our worlds are safe, will we see you again? Will humanity maintain a presence in our region of space?" Morrison stood up and walked to the window beside Admiral Reed. Outside, human and Zalani construction crews worked side by side, rebuilding a city that had been reduced to rubble just months earlier. In the distance, a small fleet of human ships maintained patrol routes around the system, ensuring that no new threats could approach undetected. "Elder Voss," Morrison said, his voice softer than it had been during the war, "I hope you never need to see us again in a military capacity. I hope your people can live in peace, explore the galaxy, make new friends, and build whatever kind of civilization makes you happy. That's all we ever wanted for ourselves, and it's what we want for you." He turned back to face the Zalani Council, and his expression carried both kindness and an unmistakable warning. "But if someone threatens you again, if anyone tries to hurt your people or destroy your worlds, you know how to reach us. And when you call, we'll answer. Not because we want to fight wars, but because some things are worth fighting for." The human fleet began departing Zalani's space later that day, leaving behind a small peacekeeping force and a galaxy that would never again mistake human compassion for human weakness. As the ships disappeared into hyperspace, Elder Voss stood in his rebuilt council chamber and realized that the universe had fundamentally changed for 3 centuries. Predators like the Korthak had ruled through fear because nobody else was willing to be more ruthless than they were. But now there was a new force in the galaxy, a species that combined genuine compassion with absolutely ruthless efficiency when protecting the innocent. The age of genocide was over, and the age of human protection had begun.